All right, welcome to Hannity. Tonight we have major breaking news. The Hill's John Solomon tonight has just uncovered smoking gun new evidence of FISA abuse committed at the highest levels of James Comey's FBI, including a damning email chain. Coming up, we're going to show you the damning new discoveries. Also tonight, the Mueller witch hunt is apparently winding down. The mainstream media is praying hard for the bombshell that they're not getting. And in just moments, we're going to tell you everything you need to know about the special counsel's brand new report on Lieutenant General Michael Flynn. They're going back to the 1700s. I'll explain. And an American hero's life was ruined over a process crime. While many top Democrats, they got away scot-free with much worse. Tonight, we'll show you some disgusting remarks from a prominent senator we were just talking about that thinks we, the people, are pretty stupid. And later, we'll bring you the latest chapter in the war on Christmas. Get this, featuring a far-left pastor putting the baby Jesus in a cage to protest President Trump. Unbelievable. And we'll play a powerful tribute to President George Herbert Walker Bush. Stay tuned. We begin with our breaking news opening monologue. All right, little thing about me. I grew up in a house, 50 by 100 lot, surrounded by law enforcement everywhere. My mom was a prison guard for 25 years. My father, he was a family court probation officer. Many cousins were on the New York Police Department. And my two relatives that made it to the FBI, they were considered deity. Not kidding. But tonight, I'm shocked and frankly saddened by what is corruption and abuse of power at the very top of America's most trusted institutions. Now, breaking tonight, the Hill's John Solomon has just dropped yet another bombshell on James Comey's FBI. And according to the Hill and his report, newly unearthed emails show that top DOJ FBI officials that they engaged in a willful and organized effort to defraud a FISA court judge prior to the 2016 election. Now, we've talked about this, but we never had these emails. This all surrounds the FISA warrant application and the subsequent renewal applications of Trump campaign associate Carter Page. Now, according to those newly uncovered emails, we now know the basis for this warrant was the Clinton bought and paid for dirty dossier. Remember, the bulk of evidence. Now, James Comey, along with other top DOJ officials and FBI officials, they knew that the evidence presented in the dossier was shady at best. This is what Solomon has uncovered tonight. The email exchanges show that the FBI were aware before they secured the now infamous warrant that there were intelligence community concerns about the reliability of the main evidence used to support it, that being the Hillary Clinton, Christopher Steele Russian dossier. And according to Solomon, the FBI was fully aware that Steele was, quote, had contacts with news media reporters before the FISA warrant was even secured. Now, remember, the FBI attempted to bolster its FISA application. Remember, they used what we call circular reporting, Yahoo News. And by the way, they knew the source was Christopher Steele. So it's all really just one source, but they like to create the impression for the court that there's multiple sources. No, that's circular reporting. So to recap, the FBI under President Obama, they got a warrant to spy on Trump campaign associate Carter Page at the height of the 2016 election. In order to achieve this feat, well, they had presented the FISA court judge with evidence that we now know that the FBI knew was sketchy and knew was not verified. And they themselves had doubts about it ever being true. Now, they knew the evidence was bought and paid for, too, by Hillary Clinton. That was withheld from the FISA court judges. And the evidence was bolstered with the circular media reporting that the FBI knew Christopher Steele was behind. But as we now know, that's not how so-called evidence was presented to the FISA court. So tonight, the smoking gun evidence that the FBI, under James Comey's leadership, committed a complete and total fraud on the FISA courts by presenting the court Hillary's bought and paid Russian dossier as real intelligence, and they hid the fact that the other evidence was nothing more than circular reporting. They knew it all. The email chain shows it all. Now, the evidence shows a serious miscarriage of justice, a serious abuse of power. It should shock every American, especially in light of yesterday's news. And this Friday, James Comey will testify before the House Judiciary Committee. Hopefully, he will be held accountable. Now, we did reach out to the FBI and James Comey for comment. We've yet to receive a response. John Solomon will join us with more on this devastating new report in a minute. But first, we do turn to the mainstream media's obsession of the week, once again featuring Robert Mueller's partisan witch hunt. And thanks to the latest special counsel memo on Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, well, many in the press are yet again predicting an end to the Trump presidency. This is going on for 2 years. Hasn't happened yet. Take a look.
I'm going to tell you one thing I take away. There's about a size 16 shoe going to drop here.
My takeaway was that Bob Mueller and his people have a substantial case going here.
Anyone who's in Flynn's orbit either before the election, during the transition, and those few weeks that Flynn is the national security advisor is worried.
If you're in Trump land tonight and these documents come down, how do you feel?
I'm wigging out.
The fact that he is saying senior government leaders should be held to the highest standards, I would be a little nervous if I were the people involved in the obstruction of justice investigation, starting, of course, with the President of the United States.
All right, despite the hysteria, predictable hysteria you just saw, the latest Mueller memo does not contain any Watergate-like revelations, not even close. Here are the facts. The Mueller memo makes references to Lieutenant General Flynn violating, and you got to pay. This is how deep they had to dig here. Violating the Logan Act. The Logan Act is an archaic law that was passed, get this, in 1799, and it was only responsible for 2 indictments in the 1800s. Now, he was also allegedly being investigated for violations of the Foreign Agents Registration Act, or FARA as it's called, which was used only 7 times since it became law in 1966. This is how, it's all in that memo that we had last night. This is how desperate and how pathetic Robert Mueller is. Now remember, Lieutenant General Flynn was first a victim of a crime himself because they knew nothing about General Flynn except that they illegally surveilled him, illegally amassed him. They put aside the, what we now call, you're supposed to do mitigating. They're supposed to literally, once you hear an American's on the line, you are not supposed to identify them. And then raw intelligence on General Flynn was leaked. And that illegally leaked information was then used against him by Team Mueller. And Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, well, he pled guilty to a process crime. That's true. They can't get him on any other underlying crimes about collusion with Russia. And lying to Mueller's investigators, where neither Comey didn't think he lied, McCabe didn't think he lied, and Peter Strzok, who interviewed him, he never thought Lieutenant General Flynn was lying. He pleaded guilty only after, let's see, he had legal bills that were wrecking his finances, forcing him to sell his family home, nearly going bankrupt, and in all likelihood, he was told investigators would go after his son, who he did business with. So he fell on the sword in that case. Is that what justice in America is supposed to look like to you? What about Mr. Mueller? Are you happy about this? Is this what we get after your 567-day investigation? This guy served his country 33 years, 5 years in combat. According to the memo, Flynn agreed to cooperate with the Mueller investigation, but the details of that cooperation are redacted. However, the memo does detail 0 evidence of collusion, none, 0 once again. And while an American military hero's life has been wrecked for a process crime, well, take a look at those on the left. You see those people there? Well, they seemingly will never be prosecuted for their lying. Longtime Clinton aides Cheryl Mills and Uma Abedi. Remember, they lied to the FBI about Hillary Clinton's private email system. DOJ official Bruce Orr or Fusion GPS founder Glenn Simpson likely lied. Why do we know? Because they gave completely contradictory testimony. Then we have dirty dossier author Christopher Steele. He was fired from the FBI for lying. That didn't stop him from trying to work with Bruce Orr and feed special counsel Mueller more of his phony lies in the course of this investigation. James Clapper lied under oath about the national surveillance program. So too did John Brennan, as he also likely lied under oath about leaking. And we know James Comey lied to Congress about when he wrote the report exonerating Clinton. And Comey's second in command, Andrew McCabe, was fired because of a long pattern of lying. Don't forget Lois Lerner lied to investigators about the IRS scandal. Obama's AG Loretta Lynch lied about talking to anyone on the Clinton campaign about the FBI's Clinton probe. And another Obama AG, Eric Holder, lied under oath on multiple occasions. But rest assured, Robert Mueller can now sleep well at night after taking down a decorated military hero who dedicated his entire adult life to public service. 33 years serving his country, 5 of those years in the field of battle. Great job, Mr. Mueller. And I'm sure America is feeling a lot safer tonight now that Lieutenant General Flynn pled guilty to lying to the FBI when the FBI never thought he lied. Now, later this
Russia investigation. So it's a large group of people trying to get ready to get this FISA warrant submitted to the court. And there are 2 or 3 very important revelations. One is that James Comey's involved in discussions. 2, there is mention in these emails that the intelligence community, possibly the NSA or another agency, had concerns about the quality of the intelligence in the Steele dossier. And 3, that there were pretty significant worries, concerns that Christopher Steele had already begun talking to the news media. This is before they file the FISA warrant, before they fire him. If all those things are true, if the FBI had not corroborated and there were concerns about the Steele dossier, if they knew that Steele had talked to Yahoo News and then Yahoo News is used as a corroborating piece of evidence for the dossier, these are serious issues. They would be misleading the court with this information by portraying it as something more solid than it is. And, you know, we learned all about this funny from really 2 appearances on Fox News over the holiday week. Devin Nunes showed up on Maria Bartiromo's show and your show, and he said, hey, I kind of amended my request for the declassification. No one followed up, and so we started asking questions, and we found out there's an email trail, and it may be some of the more damning and belated produced evidence that may suggest wrongdoing at the FBI.
Let's go through this slowly. So we have now evidence that you have uncovered, email chains from these people in the FBI, DOJ that are at the top levels.
Right.
And what we now know is they knew that this was not verified, this dossier. They knew that they knew where it came from, that Hillary had paid for it. They never took the time to verify it themselves. And rather than do their due diligence, they went along and just decided that they wanted to get the FISA warrant, and they committed what is ultimately a conscious fraud on the court. Is that a fair characterization?
I think that's the question and the allegation that has to be further investigated. Until we see the actual language of this email, I don't want to pass judgment, but I can tell you people who have seen it or have been involved with that email say directly it's among the most damning evidence of wrongdoing by the FBI. If those people see it, and if Devin Nunes thought it was important enough to bother the president and ask him to declassify this among the other documents, I think we should assume it's a very important piece of evidence.
So how could anybody justify not telling the court key pieces of information? Before, you know, we have a quote of Rod Rosenstein. It was back in May when he said, when you're talking about a FISA, you know, you have a career law enforcement official, and they put their signature there. That's the full faith and credibility that they're putting behind that warrant.
Yeah.
But they never verified it, and now we know that they even suspected themselves that none of it was true in many ways, but it never stopped them because their desire to get that warrant far exceeded a desire to do it use the proper process and processes and do due diligence, and they wanted it more than they wanted to follow the law, and they purposely kept information that is pertinent from the judges. That's fair, right?
Yeah, I think that's definitely, I think that is now not in dispute anymore. Let's think about what we know, Sean, for sure. Indisputable. The core evidence for the FISA warrant, that's Andy McCabe's description. Without it, we would not have pursued the FISA warrant, came from a product paid for by Hillary Clinton and the Democratic Party to try to destroy Donald Trump in the final months of the election. We know that the people who handled that evidence prepared and tried to rush it through the FBI to the court were 2 agents who on their own said they wanted to stop Donald Trump from becoming president. We know the person who created the dossier doesn't stand by it. He says he knew it was uncorroborated intelligence when he submitted it, and he himself despised Donald Trump. And despite all that, and now the NSA or some other intelligence community agency having concerns about the dossier, and the FBI knowing the journalists they were going to use as corroborating, all of that's now not disputed, and yet we think this is a good product. I think that's the question that we need to have answered. Why did this move forward with all these flaws?
These aren't just flaws. They knew it was fraudulent, and their desire to get Trump, I would argue, far exceeds it by other evidence. So now the question is, the president before the election talked about unredacting and releasing the FISA applications. That has not happened yet. Gang of Eight information. That has not happened yet. The 302s with Bruce Orr and Christopher Steele. That has not happened yet. And the president recently said, well, I might do it at the appropriate time if this is the fight that the Democrats
or trying to sway the investigation at the last minute. It's on a wind down. Let it wind down is what the president and his lawyers, I think, are thinking, according to my reporting. And then we can have this debate about how this thing originated and all the flaws that occurred and try to make sure it doesn't happen again to some other person in the future. I think that's the process he's following.
John Solomon, great reporting. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
This is huge. We'll have more on this later in the show. All right. Yesterday, during a conference in Washington, Democratic Senator Mazie Hirono explaining why Democrats have a hard time connecting with voters. They're just too smart. We'll get to that in a minute. But first, joining us is former Speaker of the House, author of the bestseller Trump's America, The Truth About Our Nation's Great Comeback, Newt Gingrich. All right. When you read this thing on General Flynn, we find out, okay, that there are only 2 known instances in which individuals have been indicted for violating the Logan Act, the last of which came in 1853, and neither indictment resulted in conviction. And the other one that's mentioned is the Farrar Law, and we know that the DOJ issued a report that tallied all the prosecutions under Farrar since 1966. That would be 7 cases with 1 conviction. Is this how deep we go to get a guy that served 33 years in the military that the FBI didn't believe was lying?
Sure. I mean, look, you have to understand, Mueller's not involved in a investigation. Mueller has a Trump destruction project. He brought on a team, all of them dedicated to destroying Trump. They've done everything they could to destroy Trump. And part of that technique, which frankly, Sidney Powell described brilliantly in her book, License to Lie, about the Justice Department. Part of that technique is you throw the kitchen sink. You basically threaten somebody and say, I'm going to bankrupt you. I'm going to put your son in jail. I'm going to charge you with so many different crimes you'll never get out from under it. Now would you like to talk? And when you have the full power of the federal government against you, it's pretty tough not to try to find a way to get them off your back. But it has nothing to do with the truth. It has nothing to do with justice. And Mueller, I think, in a really sad, historians someday will comment that this was one of the most extraordinary efforts to undo the will of the American people by an established bureaucracy and its establishment friends that we've seen in all of American history. And I want to make one quick point, just to put this in context. Donald Trump, after 92% negative coverage for 2 years. 92% negative coverage for 2 years is somewhere between 44 and 48% approval, depending on the poll. Ronald Reagan, about this point in 1983, was at 35%. The fact is that Macron, the wonder boy of France, is now down at 25 or 26% and just had the worst riots in Paris in 50 years. So the whole notion that Mueller is now the person who's going to go out and save America by destroying the president, I think is an anti-constitutional effort by the organized left.
So John Solomon just breaks this story. Now, we knew that they didn't verify the dossier, and it was not corroborated, which is part of their protocol and also part of the law. But now we see an email chain where they knew it had massive credibility problems. This is what he discovered, an email chain with all of these people's names in it that shows they knew that there were credibility problems to the very evidence, that the bulk of evidence that was used to obtain the FISA warrants, in the FISA applications, and they withheld all of that exculpatory information from the judges, as well as who paid for it, which was Hillary, and how it was a political document. How can they get away with that abuse of power?
Well, because they're the establishment. They're the fix. They're the insiders. They're the guys that the New York Times and the Washington Post and all the networks, except for Fox, all surround and protect them. They operated on a premise, and of course, they all thought Hillary was going to win. So they never thought this would come to light. They thought they were helping the winner. And I think it was an enormous shock election night to suddenly start, for Comey in particular, to suddenly start realizing that his neck was on the line. He'd been breaking the law. But he always thought he'd be protected. Everybody near the Clintons have been protected, as you pointed out earlier.
Comey's name is in this email chain. He's on the email chain. He signed off on that.
Of course. You had the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation actively trying to destroy a presidential candidate. You have the former head of the FBI, Bob Mueller, actively trying to destroy the President of the United States. I mean, there's a point here, and I know it's frustrating, but the fact is, this is a clear-cut drama. They hate him. They want to destroy him. It has nothing to do with the truth and nothing to do with the law.
Well, if we don't get everyone else that lied, that we know lied, under oath, if Hillary's never held accountable, you could say we have no equal justice or application of our laws. And that's the scary part for every American. Mr. Speaker, thank you. When we come back, a one-on-one shootout, me versus Geraldo Rivera, about immigration. Also, later, we've got an update to tell you about. Remember the teacher ruining Christmas for 5- and 6-year-olds? Oh, you won't believe it. And one church literally put what is a statue of the baby Jesus in a cage to make a political statement against Donald Trump. Shocking. Straight ahead. And meanwhile, yesterday, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals struck down legislation that makes it a crime to encourage illegal immigration, ruling the law violates free speech. And a Massachusetts state judge is now suspected of helping an illegal immigrant flee ICE. And as we previously reported on the show, Congresswoman, there she is, Pramila Jayapal, who participates in the writing of the nation's laws. Well, she went and met the caravan, met up with them in Tijuana, escorted several migrants across the country. Isn't that nice of them? And joining us now, Fox News correspondent at large, Geraldo Rivera. Geraldo, let me just read this to you a little bit here. We talked about family separation, and we've talked about all the issues involving immigration. Well, number one, we have a study that shows $70,000 per year the American taxpayer pays for every illegal immigrant. We have also 63% of illegal immigrants get some form of government assistance. But look at this one case. Here we have, a guy that had been deported 8 times now commits a murder with a guy he works with at a creamery. Geraldo, you get so worked up, and I love you for your passion of people. I want the wall. I want to vet people. I want to make sure they can take care of themselves and are not a burden on the American taxpayer. We need the wall. And I think it would be good for people on both sides.
I think that you and I together, Sean, bridge the spectrum on this issue. We both want the wall. I think that the wall will bring order to the border. It won't solve the problem, particularly of the drug cartels or the professional criminals, but it will stop some of the kind of chaos that we've seen recently with the migrant caravan. All I am asking is for compassion for the youngsters brought here at a tender age by their parents through no fault of their own. If the president can win the wall, the Congress funding of the $5 billion down payment for the wall, then I think the Democrats in Congress, it is incumbent on them to compromise if they want the dreamers to get the pathway to citizenship. There is a compromise there. This issue is fraught with emotion. You mentioned the fellow who deported 8 times and kills his colleague at
by the way,
work
the
there.
Weekend before, a young teacher in Texas, same story.
Horrible. But there are, for instance,
Steinle.
within the sound of my voice here in the heart of Manhattan, there are 1 million undocumented immigrants within just the radius here, just the radius of New York City. You never hear about them. Why? Because they commit fewer crimes than citizens, Sean. They are people that just want to feed their children. They just want the American dream. They live in desperately poor countries. They come because they are hungry. They come because they're afraid.
Wait a minute. I can sympathize with that, but look at this study that we have out. A majority of non-citizens, even those with legal green cards, are tapping into welfare programs to the tune of this is according to the Census Bureau, 63%, the last reporting year, 2014, non-citizens using welfare programs, and it grows to 70% for those here 10 years or more. So it is costing us a fortune, number one. It compromises our safety, number two. It puts a burden on our criminal justice system, educational system, and healthcare system. Where is the sympathy for the American people? Right. We deserve to be protected first before we start thinking about helping other people in other countries.
See, your viewers know you as the tough guy. And, you have a very strong commitment to patriotism, and I love you for it. You are my brother. You know that when immigrants come to this country, they come poor. They come because they are the wretched masses yearning to breathe free. They come because they're the Irish suffering from the potato famine, or the Jews suffering from the pogroms.
Why don't we take care of the poor Americans first? And then maybe we can think about helping with our generosity. There's never been a country that accumulated more power and advanced it for human good than this one.
The fellow you mentioned that killed his friend there. If you mention that, in fairness, there are 10 million or 11 million undocumented immigrants. Why not we talk about the 9,999,000 who did nothing but go to work and take care of their children and make their community a safer place? I think it's unfair when we take these anecdotes and we scare people with it.
Will they pay for their own vetting? Will they also guarantee that there won't be a burden on the American taxpayer?
They'll pay the next generation.
Are those two conditions fair?
Enrico Fermi, Albert Einstein, all immigrants, they come here.
You're not answering. Should they pay for their own vetting?
Will,
and should they?
You can build them. By the second generation, they'll be totally assimilated. By the third generation, they won't even speak their native language anymore. This is a nation of immigrants.
A year per,
we need a combination of pragmatism and compassion.
All right. Geraldo, you get the last word. When we come back, Rush Limbaugh calling out the phony mainstream media. Jenna Bush Hager explaining how a magazine cover that called her grandfather a wimp impacted her. And I'll address that and much more. A Hannity mini monologue, and then later, how one church is politicizing Christmas. You won't believe it. And we have an update on that teacher that said to 5- and 6-year-olds that Santa doesn't exist. By the way, kids, fake news. Wasn't true. Update on that teacher straight ahead. Right now, the unhinged 24/7 destroy Trump, anti-Trump media continues to lose credibility by the second, especially as they use the passing of President George H.W. Bush to attack President Trump. Unfortunately, they're just behaving as I told you that they would, and that is the subject of tonight's mini monologue. All right, so as the nation mourns the loss of President George H.W. Bush, well, many in the media, they continue to use his death and incredible legacy to denigrate President Trump. Their tactics are getting more disturbing as they move on. Just look at how the mainstream media went after the president for paying his respects to the late 41st Commander-in-Chief. Take a look.
Could not help, as an American having lived through the last 3.5 years, or 3 years, 2 years especially, to apply words to moments over those last 2 years and go, wow, wouldn't it have been nice and different if?
It became uncomfortable when every one of the people who eulogized the 41st president talked about civility, talked about generosity. You could feel the unstated, I mean, it was a contrast.
I think Prince Charles has felt more comfortable in New Guinea than this president felt here today.
He's not one to mend fences too readily. I think he's doing this because he feels he has to do it. I can't help but wonder if there was a thought bubble over Donald Trump's head just now, what he was thinking as he stood there. I
have to imagine he was thinking, how much longer do I have to stand here?
Pretty shameful, sickening, but not at all surprising. Now, Rush Limbaugh, appearing with our own Shannon Bream, he didn't hold back in calling out this media hypocrisy. Let's take a look at what Rush says.
It's phony. They never treated him this way when he was president. They were vicious to him like they are vicious and partisan to every Republican. I think it's just a vehicle for them, Shannon, to be able to contrast what they think Trump is versus the way they're telling us Bush was.
All right, you see what's going on. Like we saw with Senator McCain, most in the mainstream media, they do a complete 180, forgetting their once vicious and nasty coverage, like when Senator McCain was running for president. New York Post columnist Michael Goodwin, who will join us in a moment, wrote a column this week entitled, Democrats really do love Republicans when they're dead, and Goodwin exposes just how low the press will sink to try and score cheap political points against their political enemies. And by the way, these tactics have serious implications. For example, President Bush's granddaughter, Jenna Bush Hager, she's opening up about how nasty the media can be, reflecting on Newsweek's infamous wimp cover of her grandfather from decades ago. Take a look.
He spoke softly and he didn't speak about himself. He was humble. But why did that have to equate to being a wimp? And it didn't to us. He was our hero.
If you're not outspoken and you're soft-spoken, you're a wimp. Otherwise, you're Donald Trump and you're too abrasive. All part of a pattern. Smear a person's name when they're alive. Create a veneer of bipartisanship and unity once they pass, just so they can attack their new political enemies. In this case, furthering to bludgeon Donald Trump. Here with reaction. Fox News contributor, New York Post columnist Michael Goodwin is with us. Former White House press secretary Ari Fleischer, also a Fox News contributor. Here it is. Dems love Republicans when they're dead. Michael Goodwin. The fact is, it's true.
Yes. Yes, it is sad, Sean. You're right. That, and as I point out in the column, this all sounds similar. He's a hero. He's a genial gentleman. He's a patriot. He's a great American. And they said the same thing about John McCain when he was in his coffin. But when they were alive, this same media attacked them relentlessly, accused them of racism, of stirring up, fomenting trouble everywhere, of taking the country backwards. They attacked their Supreme Court nominees with the same way that Brett Kavanaugh was attacked. So there is a pattern, except when they die, then suddenly they were the great Americans. In this case, of course, they are being used, those virtues are being used against Donald Trump. So it's really a double whammy for the Democrats in this day and age.
They did the same thing with Ronald Reagan, John McCain, Ari, with 41 and 43. You're very close to the Bush family. You were there when they were bludgeoning 43. I mean, that was a daily. I didn't think it could get worse, but it's gotten worse.
Yep.
Let me put it this way. When I die, all you liberals out there that hate me, don't change what you really think of me. Just say it. Just be honest. It's cool. It'll be all right. I'm going to give you a pass from heaven if I'm ever invited in.
Sean, here's the one that to me speaks volumes. And it was the New York Times when George H.W. Bush as president went to visit a trade show and saw absolute brand new technology for scanning products at a supermarket. Nobody had seen it before. And the New York Times story, front page, Bush encounters the supermarket, amazed. Here's the lead of the story. The career politician who lived the cloistered life of a top Washington bureaucrat for decades is having trouble presenting himself to the electorate as a man in touch with middle-class life. This now is the man that the New York Times and others are holding up as a role model for all Americans because of his goodness, because of his principle, because of his civility. They mocked him relentlessly. And the thing about that story, it was 100% fabrication. That never happened. The New York Times wasn't even at the event, and that was not what Bush was amazed about. And the New York Times just ran that story, and they haven't corrected it yet. That's correct. Dan Rather lied about 43, fabricated information about Bush.
Well, let me ask you this. So if you're soft-spoken like 41, you're a wimp in the media's eyes. If you're iconoclastic and combative like Donald Trump, you're, a brute, and this is unacceptable to the office. So you can't win, can you? And now all of a sudden, now they hated 43, Ari, now they love him. Now, we'd take him back in a minute. No, they wouldn't. They would be all over him in 5 seconds.
No, and I remember in the 2000 campaign when George W. Bush was running against John McCain, the press was all for John McCain. And I remember thinking to myself, as soon as John McCain were ever to beat George Bush, they'll go against John McCain. They'll switch on a dime.
They did.
And that's the way they always are.
Last word, Michael.
Well, yes. I mean, look at the way John McCain was treated when he ran against Barack Obama. Then he was just another dirty Republican. They loved him in 2000, and that's right. But by 2008, he was just another dirty Republican. Now he's dead, and so he's great.
Yeah, amazing. Save the lies if I ever pass away. Just speak the truth. Just say what you really feel. All right, when we come back, we've got an update. Remember the story we brought to you earlier this week, that school, that teacher, ruining Christmas for 5- and 6-year-olds? We got an important update, and you won't believe why one church put a Christ in a cage to make a cheap political point on Christmas. Unbelievable. Straight ahead. All right, now the unhinged 24/7 destroy Trump, anti-Trump media continues to lose credibility by the second, especially as they use the passing of President George H.W. Bush to attack President Trump. Unfortunately, they're just behaving as I told you that they would, and that is the subject of tonight's mini monologue. Right, so as the nation mourns the loss of President George H.W. Bush, well, many in the media, they continue to use his death and incredible legacy to denigrate President Trump. Their tactics are getting more disturbing as they move on. Just look at how the mainstream media went after the president for paying his respects to the late 41st Commander-in-Chief. Take a look.
Could not help, as an American having lived through the last 3.5 years, or 3 years, 2 years especially, to apply words to moments over those last 2 years and go, wow, wouldn't it have been nice and different if?
It became uncomfortable when every one of the people who eulogized the 41st president talked about civility, talked about generosity. You could feel the unstated, I mean, it was a contrast.
I think Prince Charles has felt more comfortable in New Guinea than this president felt here today.
He's not one to mend fences too readily. I think he's doing this because he feels he has to do it. I can't help but wonder if there was a thought bubble over Donald Trump's head just now, what he was thinking as he stood there. I
have to imagine he was thinking, how much longer do I have to stand here?
Pretty shameful, sickening, but not at all surprising. Now, Rush Limbaugh, appearing with our own Shannon Bream, he didn't hold back in calling out this media hypocrisy. Let's take a look at what Rush says.
It's phony. They never treated him this way when he was president. They were vicious to him, like they are vicious and partisan to every Republican. I think it's just a vehicle for them, Shannon, to be able to contrast what they think Trump is versus the way they're telling us Bush was.
All right, you see what's going on. Like we saw with Senator McCain, most in the mainstream media, they do a complete 180, forgetting their once vicious and nasty coverage, like when Senator McCain was running for president. New York Post columnist Michael Goodwin, who will join us in a moment, wrote a column this week entitled, Democrats really do love Republicans when they're dead, and Goodwin exposes just how low the press will sink to try and score cheap political points against their political enemies. And by the way, these tactics have serious implications. For example, President Bush's granddaughter, Jenna Bush Hager, she's opening up about how nasty the media can be, reflecting on Newsweek's infamous wimp cover of her grandfather from decades ago. Take a look.
He spoke softly and he didn't speak about himself. He was humble. But why did that have to equate to being a wimp? And it didn't to us. He was our hero.
If you're not outspoken and you're soft-spoken, you're a wimp. Otherwise, you're Donald Trump and you're too abrasive. All part of a pattern. Smear a person's name when they're alive. Create a veneer of bipartisanship and unity once they pass, just so they can attack their new political enemies. In this case, furthering to bludgeon Donald Trump. Here with reaction. Fox News contributor, New York Post columnist Michael Goodwin is with us. Former White House press secretary Ari Fleischer, also a Fox News contributor. Here it is. Dems love Republicans when they're dead. Michael Goodwin. The fact is, it's true.
Yes, it is sad, Sean. You're right. That, and as I pointed out in the column, this all sounds similar. He's a hero. He's a genial gentleman. He's a patriot. He's a great American. And they said the same thing about John McCain when he was in his coffin. But when they were alive, this same media attacked them relentlessly, accused them of racism, of stirring up, fomenting trouble everywhere, of taking the country backwards. They attacked their Supreme Court nominees with the same way that Brett Kavanaugh was attacked. So there is a pattern, except when they die, then suddenly they were the great Americans. In this case, of course, they are being used, those virtues are being used against Donald Trump. So it's really a double whammy for the Democrats in this day and age.
They did the same thing with Ronald Reagan, John McCain, Ari, with 41 and 43. You're very close to the Bush family. You were there when they were bludgeoning 43. I mean, that was a daily. I didn't think it could get worse, but it's gotten worse.
Yep.
Let me put it this way. When I die, all you liberals out there that hate me, don't change what you really think of me. Just say it. Just be honest. It's cool. It'll be all right. I'm going to give you a pass from heaven if I'm ever invited in.
Sean, here's the one that to me speaks volumes. And it was the New York Times when George H.W. Bush as president went to visit a trade show and saw absolute brand new technology for scanning products at a supermarket. Nobody had seen it before. And the New York Times story, front page, Bush encounters the supermarket, amazed. Here's the lead of the story. The career politician who lived the cloistered life of a top Washington bureaucrat for decades is having trouble presenting himself to the electorate as a man in touch with